Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Alex.
It's good to be with you. And
Oh,
now we're recording this to bluntly promote this event we're having in Pari, where you're going to be discussing and sharing what you've written in your upcoming book, How to Think Impossibly. And so this is an opportunity, well, to ask you about it and to share with people who may be potentially interested to come, well, to know what's going to happen. And anyways, it's just delightful to just share ideas with you and hear from you. So, well, tell us why you wrote this book and what it means to think impossibly, if that's not a simple question to begin with.
yeah. Well, I wrote it for my editor actually, who basically asked me to write it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try to write this. And he came up with the title, by the way, How to Think Impossibly, because that's what, of course, what I'm trying to do. You know, the basis of the book is this notion of thinking with, and I put a hyphen between thinking and with, and I'm trying to think with experiencers. And the basic argument of the book is that intellectuals and philosophers and scientists and historians should not think about these things alone. They should think with experiencers,
Mhm.
and the experiencers are co-creators of knowledge. This is a very symmetrical, very equal relationship. And for example, in the book, I write an entire chapter with an autistic gentleman here in California, in the States, and we work on this book together, or we worked on that chapter together, and it's as much Kevin as it is Jeff.
Mm.
And I try to perform that same thinking with in each of the chapters, and I'm hoping the Pari event is very much about that. I hope it's a co-creation of knowledge and thinking with and being with other people. I mean, I really think this is a way of interacting in a fairly profound way over meals and sessions with individuals who want to come to a beautiful part of the world and spend a few days with a weird person named Jeff.
Yes, well, we do that every summer, but this seems particularly not different, but at least specific because when we say think, it always evokes, yeah, you're saying the academics discussing ideas, but the fact that you're placing at the same level not just experience, but all these really weird experiences, and it's not just for fun or curiosity. I mean, you argue not just in this book, in many of your books. I mean, that's what you in a way sponsor and constantly tell us, right? That this is at the core of what it is to be a human being, not just at the fringes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the argument of the book, is that we're ignoring and dismissing precisely that which the experiencers think is the most important thing about the, their entire lives, actually, Alex. I mean, these things happen to them, and it's not that they're tangential or odd or weird. It's that this is at the core of their entire life. And so my point is, well, why aren't we listening to them? Why aren't we thinking with their stories? Because their experiences, by the way, I think encode not just story, but theory,
Mm.
and they help us to build a new world. And I'm not talking about just another book or another theory. I'm talking about a worldview and a culture that I think is trying to be born in these people's experiences. And I think it takes a lot of us to get that culture or worldview to be born. Not just the experiencers, by the way, but
Mm.
not just the geeky intellectuals either. They're not going to do it. Trust me, they're not going
Yeah.
to do it. So I think we need to do this together, is really
Mm.
the argument of the book.
The first part emphasizes, and I love that the impossible happens.
Mhm.
Um, and of course, this is not just playing with words. What's the problem with the impossible? Why do we like to tag not just experiences, sometimes ideas or things that actually happen to tag them as impossible? And how are you unmaking that in the book?
Right. Right. So, I mean, I love the category of the impossible because, of course, I don't mean it's impossible. I mean, it actually happens. I'm sorry, but it happens. And so the reason we call it impossible is because of our own worldview. It's because we're assuming a particular worldview in which this thing should not happen. But it does happen. So let's change our worldview. Let's change our categories and our way of thinking and imagining and being in the world so that we can put this stuff back on our table and embrace this. And essentially the argument of the book, and certainly my own argument that I've been trying to lay out for many, many years, is that people take everything off the table they can't explain. And then they say, oh, I can explain everything. Well, of course you can. You just took everything off the table that you can't explain. And I'm like, no, let's keep everything on the table and then let's see what a human being is and what the world looks like. That's essentially the
And those experiences, and they're varied, and we perhaps name a few in a minute, but those happen to people, certainly. They're extraordinary and at the same time very common. And yet to some people, maybe they don't happen so much, and maybe that's why they tend to believe they're impossible.
right. They don't happen to me. Uh,
Hmm.
they don't happen to a lot of people. And I think there are reasons for that, Alex, as you well know. I think trauma is really important here. I think people who are profoundly traumatized by life in some way are more open, and these things often happen to them. And I don't mean that in a reductive way. I don't mean the experience can be reduced to the trauma, but there's something about trauma that opens up the person to other aspects of reality. And so I focus in the book a lot on suffering and dissociation and dream and vision and altered states of mind or embodiment that open people up to these other realities. And I see I the fundamental argument is that the imagination is not just a spinner of fantasies. It's not just a producer of weird shit. It's actually a mediator or a translator of reality. And of course, it's going to mediate or translate reality
Hmm.
in whatever the terms of the culture or the mythology or the religion are, but the light is still coming through the stained glass. We made the stained glass, Alex, or our ancestors did, but there's still a light coming through it. And it's telling a story that our ancestors told, but maybe we don't want to live in that story. And I think these experiences that are happening are trying to push us out of our former stories, which worked for our ancestors but don't work for us. And so what's the new stories? What are the new ways of thinking about all this and not just thinking about it, but how do we make art? How do we make film? How do we make television? How do we make politics? How do we do everything? It all depends on these kinds of experiences, I think, and whether we dismiss them or embrace them.
As you're saying this, it comes to mind that it seems you're proposing kind of a meta filter or a meta theory of filter. You and I often tend to speak about the role the brain has, right? Is it producing mind, or is it permitting or reducing it? And what you're saying is, well, this mediation that imagination does is kind of a meta filter, and we need to uncover it. Is this kind of what it means to how to think impossibly? How does one think impossibly? Is at least realizing what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, how to think. I mean, I go into how to think impossibly in great detail, of course, but basically, it's looking at the brain and the body as a filter and not as a producer of consciousness, which then, by the way, becomes culture. We encode
Ah,
consciousness in culture. Culture is essentially consciousness that's been encoded in material artifacts and political and social systems. And my argument is, look, if we understand consciousness differently, we're also going to create different cultures. We're going to do this thing differently. And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but it ain't working so well these days. Our past religions and cultures and nation states are quite violent and exclusive, and we're deeply, deeply harming the environment. And we could actually end human civilization within an hour, right now. And so there is something really wrong with the way we've done this and the way we're doing it now. And I'm just one person trying to say, stop it, stop doing that. And I think these experiencers are telling stories that are trying to get us out of that whatever that is.
I appreciate from this claim. that I share with you, that you're not grumpy about it. And also that you don't come with like a 6 bullet point plan to save the planet, right? That's also
Yeah.
that also feels like, all right, great, because entering into that mode doesn't, it seems to be the same kind of thing, just multiplied by -1. There's something about mystery there, something really, really, no, maybe it's not unknowable, but deeply mysterious about all of these. And maybe this reflects the fact that we'll be talking with you and experiencing with you, hopefully, phenomena that appear so disparate, and yet they perhaps stem from the same thing, right? Like UFO encounters that some people may say, really? Well, yes, near-death experiences and aspects about time and physics and belief and praying mantises and souls. So what's into this mix, and what's in this? What do you see in the center? And at the center, they seem to be orbiting like as if they were planets. They're orbiting around a sun, and I think we're trying to see what that sun is.
I would too. I would too, Àlex. I can say so much about all of that. The book is very much about how the UFO and the soul, the flying saucer and the soul are related, and how the UFO experience is really on one level, it's an experience of the world of the dead. And the world of the dead is something, of course, human beings have been experiencing for millennia. And often, by the way, framing in flying saucer terms. I mean, that really is true. There is this connection. But I think on another level, when I was young and naive, maybe young like you, I'm not going to call you naive, Àlex, but young, I had this thought, oh, I just have to read enough books and find smart enough people, and we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna get this thing. Well, I'm 61 now. That ain't gonna happen. Uh, I don't think it can happen in principle. I don't think anybody knows what's going on. Um, and when I listen to experiencers, I know a few things instantly.
Mhm.
I know that the first story they tell me is not the full story. Okay, I know that. And it never is. When they tell me the same story again, it's weirder. And then they tell me again, and it's weirder, and it's weirder, and it's weirder. And it never, ever makes sense, as we say. It never fits into our perceptual apparatus. And to me, that's kind of a key here is let go of that. Let go of that perceptual apparatus. Let go of the idea that your eyes and your ears and all your senses are somehow adequate to the full perception of reality. They're not.
Mhm.
You're just picking up this tiny little spectrum of what's really there. And I think what's happening in these experiences is more stuff is coming in. It's getting translated through the imagination and the mind or the culture, but it's still coming in. And so that's why I'm so much about thinking with this. And the weirder it is, the better, in my opinion. Absurdity is significant. If it makes sense, I don't trust it
Mhm.
because it just reflects us back to ourselves, and we get to go on with this really dysfunctional worldview. If it's absurd or crazy or wild, it's trying to kick us out of this worldview. And so I think we should be listening to that and taking it to heart and not just say, oh, that's absurd. Well, of course it's absurd. It's meant to be absurd. There's a lot of things in the history of religions, by the way, that are meant to be absurd. And that's part of the process. That's
Mhm.
part of the liberation from the ordinary worldview.
What kind of people do you imagine coming to Pari, based on the kind of people that show interest in your work? I mean, I suppose we are weird people just because we're interested in weird things, but we're speaking about the particular kind of weird here.
So I honestly believe that most people are here, what I'm talking about. They are not literal believers in X, Y, or Z, and they are not skeptical debunkers in A, B, and C. They are in the middle, and they're looking for a way of thinking about themselves and the world that is neither naively believing nor naively debunking. And
Mm.
those are the people I think that would be attracted to this. Um, and also, frankly, as you know, I've done a lot of these. I've done 50 of these seminars in the States. And I know that a lot of the work, as it were, goes on over meals and in the evenings and around the edges. The seminars are important, the conversations are important, but they're not the whole thing. It's the full force of the person that you're interacting with. It's the real thing. And so I think that's what's most attracts me to Pari and to this event is just sitting with people and listening to their stories. And I'm not there, Àlex, to tell them the truth. Um, I'm there to listen to their stories and for us to come to some greater truth together. And I think I can help. I mean, that's what I do as a teacher every day. I go into a classroom and I help young people articulate their own ideas. I don't tell them what to think. That's not what a good teacher does. And I think that's the power of these kinds of events.
And that's precisely why we want you there and why we invited you back. You came last summer, if you remember, but we wanted to have a full Jeff Kripal gig. So this is going to go over a long weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning. And yes, I like very much that you emphasize this, because this is not like just a long book presentation event. It isn't, and it is that as well. It isn't a series of lectures. And if I've heard you say this recently, you're there to interact with the people. I mean, this is the real thing. And this thinking with experiences, it also involves ourselves going there. I mean, this is the thinking with we're going to be doing. So I really appreciate that you bring to Pari, to Tuscany, your great scholarship, and also this very human sense of participation and being with the other people.
Yeah, if so if people read the books, they know that I often talk about other people who show up at conferences and events just like this. And of course, I never do that without their permission and without working with them. But no, it's a real thing. I really mean this. It's not just like some kind of duty or performance. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I will really, this is really a co-creation of a new world, and we're in this together. So let's do it. And so and the books, the book, um, it's sort of an excuse to have this conversation. The conversation is primary, actually. The book is, I actually revere books because books affect people 24 hours a day all over the world when I can't talk to them. And they will continue to affect people. By the way, when I die, Àlex, I mean, books are really weird, weird technologies that I think vastly underestimate. I also think they can even be telepathic at times. I mean, when you pick up a book, you are recreating the mindset and the emotions and the personality of the person who wrote that book. And that person doesn't have to be present. That person doesn't have to be alive even. So there's something really extraordinary. But I don't think the action is all in the book. I don't think that for a second. I think the real action is among the people.
Yes, yes. And we're very happy that you come to Europe. I mean, you're well known in the US, and I hope that in Europe, and probably, of course, they're following you, but I really would like to have people from all over the world, but it's like we're giving this opportunity to the kind of more Eurocentric gathering, at least in terms of, the landscape and the culture and so on, to talk about these things, because, I mean, this is happening in Italy. I'm from Spain. We hardly ever talk about these things in Spain either. Maybe in the US you do more, but to me, it's like an opportunity for you to cross the ocean and bring that boldness and that weirdness and well-centered and well placed in Europe, like the old continent that is crumbling, so that we also have a chance to kind of rebuke or come back anew.
Yeah, and of course, American culture is very much dependent on European cultures. I mean, it's a shared conversation, and a lot of the weird stuff that has happened in history actually has happened in Spain and Italy and Germany and England. I mean, come on, you're as strange as we are. It's just I know that stuff isn't talked about as much today, and I know different cultures handle it or censor it in different ways. Um, And there is a kind of looseness in the States, by the way, Àlex. I mean, there is a kind of freedom. I don't mean that in a romantic or idea or political sense, but American intellectuals can be weird in a way that I think European intellectuals have to be more careful about, if I might engage in stereotypes. And I have a lot of European colleagues, Àlex. I'm not speaking from ignorance here. I'm speaking from 3 decades of experience, So, yeah, and also, I'm a professor of religious studies or a historian of religions. Nobody expects us to know anything, so um, we can get away with a lot of things, that our physicists or our chemist friends cannot get away with because they're expected to know things and prove things, and they just can't say these things.
You're right. You're right. Speaking about your long trajectory here, do you sense, apart from the urgency you were alluding to before, at least I sense it, but maybe it's because I came anew to all of this, mostly through your work, and I sense like I sense something big is about to happen with all of this. And it's
Right.
like, well, maybe it's like it's right, the right timing to just have you come. By the way, you're coming a few days before your book is officially out in July. So this is going to happen the last days of June of this year. Do you sense, apart from, again, the world needs it, that perhaps something is going to happen? This in terms of like a general deep interest in all of this.
So I get asked that question a lot.
You
I
do?
mean, yeah, we talk about it in the States in the UFO world through this notion of disclosure. And I'm actually quite critical of disclosure because it presumes that somebody knows what to disclose. I just don't think so. I think people are lost and they're covering up their own ignorance and their own not knowing. And I think the quicker we admit that, the better off we'll be. And so, on the other hand, this is another book I wrote. I wrote a big book on the American counterculture. And that was a time when things exploded, by the way. I mean, but it exploded through psychedelics, Asian religions, rock and roll, and an anti-war movement. And they all came together and they just like exploded in the 1960s. So that zeitgeist, I don't think no one's in control of that zeitgeist. The pieces have to be there. And I think today with climate crisis and issues around race and gender and sexuality and political violence and war, we're at a very different period. And we have very different challenges than we had 60 years ago. But we can do it again. I'm an optimist. I really am. I had this conversation a few weeks ago with a novelist, and I was like, why is every vision of the future so freaking bad? Why when you turn on the TV, every science fiction movie about the future, it's a dystopia. Whatever happened to utopian visions? Whatever happened to something positive? And of course, what happened is what happened. But trust me, there are very few utopian visions on your television or in your movie screen. But this is one. This is one. This is one we're going to explore in Pari.
A weirdtopia, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a utopian thinker or an optimist, partly because of my genetics and my family. I mean, I think my mother's very much utopian, but I'm also optimistic because of what I think about thought. I think thought tends to realize itself. I think magic is a real thing, and if we're optimists, we're likely going to produce a good future. If there are way more reasons to be pessimistic, Àlex. I get them. I really do. I understand them all. But if we are pessimistic, we are likely to produce a bad future. And so I'm an optimist for magical or practical reasons. I'm not naive about it. And I think the full spectrum of critical thinking is called for here along the environment and our bodies and our races and our nation state, all of it. We need to be very critical, but that doesn't mean we also should not be optimistic.
Wonderful. Jeff, you're amazing. I always tell you. You're really great.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I'm not sure it's true, but I appreciate you saying that.
I believe it. Anyways,
Okay, good,
thank
good.
you. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for coming to Italy this summer. And see you there if you want to come and learn or try or experience how to think impossibly.
Or just be impossible. Just be.
Just
Don't do anything inappropriate, but just be impossible. That's a good thing.
all right. Till then,
All right.
great. Bye bye, Jeff.